is the government programming we have been given since we began school as children. These topics are given to us to be boring, explained to us in the most complex way so we cannot understand them, so we never ask questions, so we never seek the truth, and in the end we simply believe the lies and accept the education and knowledge we have as correct. So let's look into it. The disaster killed 49 people almost immediately, almost all of them reactor staff and emergency workers. Between 30 and 50 emergency workers died shortly afterwards from acute radiation. Sounds similar to the Ed and White hours, sudden deaths of emergency workers and witnesses. Funny how in these events everyone involved ends up dead. May 8, 1986. The Health Ministry of the Soviet Union has approved new acceptable levels of radiation to which the public can be exposed in that are 10 times higher than former levels. In special cases, levels up to 50 times higher than former levels are acceptable. June 23, 1986. Report on the possibility of returning children and pregnant women to areas with radiation levels within the range of 2 milliarms per hour to 5 milliarms per hour. Note, U.S. government sets the maximum allowable exposure of an adult working with radioactive material at fewer than 6,000 milliarms per year and recommends that human fetuses be exposed to no more than 50 milliarms per month. Resolution of the Politburo of the CPSU Central Committee on May 8, 1986. Minutes recorded by Comrade V.S. Murakowski. When slaughtering livestock and pigs, it has been found that their meat can be made fit for consumption by washing the stomachs with water and removing the lymph nodes. Addendum. Distribute meat contaminated by radiation as widely as possibly throughout the country and use it in a ratio of 1:10 with normal meat to make sausage, canned and processed meat. Many people live and work in the restricted zone today. Many who live the continued living off the land. Today research laboratories and security forces are the main businesses running in the restricted area. News report from April 28, 1986.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened. The Soviet version is this. One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant in the city of Kiev was damaged, and there is speculation in Moscow that people were injured and may have died. The Soviets may have been fairly quick to acknowledge the accident because evidence, in the form of mild nuclear radiation, had already reached beyond the Soviet borders to Scandinavia. We begin with ABC's Dean Reynolds.
The first word that something was seriously wrong came from this power plant in eastern Sweden, where workers coming on the job registered abnormally high levels of radiation on their bodies. Although the levels were not high enough to harm humans and no accident had occurred at that plant, it was shut down. And as tests were conducted, similar puzzling reports of high radiation came in from all over Scandinavia. But still, no accidents were reported, leading to the conclusion that the problem was elsewhere, to the east, in the Soviet Union, a fact confirmed to the Soviet people on television tonight.
An official announcement from the Council of Ministers. There has been an accident at the Chernobyl atomic power station. One of the atomic reactors was damaged. The consequences of the accident are being taken care of. Help is being given to the victims of the accident. A government commission has been set up.
The civilian plant in question is in the Ukraine. It's something of a showcase facility, featured here in Soviet Life magazine, which extolled its safety record. It's near the city of Kiev, population 2.5 million, and about 1,000 miles from Scandinavia, meaning that whatever did occur there, a radioactive cloud headed north across Poland today and into Denmark, where radiation levels were 5 times normal, to Finland, 6 times normal, to Norway, up 50%, and Sweden, illegally high.
Almost certainly the most severe accident that has ever taken place in the short history of civilian nuclear power.
That means it is far worse than the 3 Mile Island incident of 1979. Experts tonight say the cloud of radiation is now dissipating over the North Atlantic and poses no further threat to anyone. But as the Soviets treat an unknown number of casualties, there's no way to say how much lasting damage that cloud may have already caused. Dean Reynolds, ABC News, London.
This is Roger Peterson. Until the accident, there were 50 nuclear reactors operating in the Soviet Union, generating 11% of that nation's electricity. Most of the larger Soviet plants differ in design from U.S. reactors. The major
Cooling
difference
water
is
led to fuel
most
getting so
Soviet
hot it
nuclear
melted.
plants do not have containment buildings, the thick concrete dome structures Americans are used to seeing built around U.S. reactors. When the worst American nuclear accident occurred at 3 Mile Island, most leaking radiation was kept inside the containment building, unlike this Soviet accident, where radiation has been measured 600 to 1,000 miles away.
The TMI accident was nothing compared with this. I would speculate that it was very serious, and the reason for that is that they've observed radiation levels 10 times normal from Finland all the way down to Stockholm.
Mackenzie says the type of radioactive material spotted could only come from the core, meaning the accident was a meltdown or something comparable. At 3 Mile Island, there was a partial meltdown. The loss of cooling water led to fuel getting so hot it melted, but the core was contained by that thick concrete containment building. In the Soviet accident, there would be nothing to stop a meltdown. The hot core could have melted right into the earth. There are indications the accident could have happened several days ago. It would take that long for radiation to drift to Scandinavia and to make the political decision to announce it.
You can be sure that the decision to disclose was made at the very highest level, undoubtedly by Gorbachev himself, and probably it took several days for the Soviet leaders to decide how to handle it.
Officially, little comment from the president or his aides.
As far as the United States is concerned, we don't see any dangerous situation.
The Soviets claim this is their first nuclear accident, but it's known in 1958 a nuclear explosion killed several hundred and left a large area contaminated some 800 miles east of Moscow. Washington sources speculate the accident at Chernobyl had to be very bad, or else the Soviets would never have acknowledged it. Roger Peterson, ABC News, Washington.
When looking for statistics on events like these, the important thing to keep in mind is this: statistics are kept by government and elite-controlled organizations. Most of them are not detailed or thorough as they are not combined, typically, with other studies etc. Plus, you must realize the wording they use to draw your focus from relevant facts. Radiation, like a dust, travels in water, on the wind, and is easily shaken off of your clothes and skin, causing you no harm whatsoever. Ingested, it becomes a different story. In the case of Chernobyl, the Russian Medical Radiation Monitoring Register at an international forum in Vienna, Austria, 20 years after the disaster. Cancer is heightened in children of these types of events, typically because of failure to take specific measures. 200 out of the 400 cases of thyroid carcinoma monitored by medical staff in the regions that were affected the hardest by Chernobyl were attributed to the disaster. This would be due to the people eating food grown in that area and drinking milk and water from that area infected by radioactive iodine. Iodine affects the thyroid. It is very delicate and you have to take extreme care. However, with proper care, thyroid problems are fixable, and 90% of thyroid cancer from Chernobyl was cured because of proper care. As the World Health Organization wrote in a 2006 report, a large increase in the incidence of thyroid cancer has occurred among people who were young children and adolescents at the time of the accident and lived in the most contaminated areas of Belarus, the Russian Federation and Ukraine. This was due to the high levels of radioactive iodine released from the Chernobyl reactor in the early days after the accident. Radioactive iodine was deposited in pastures eaten by cows who then concentrated it in their milk, which was subsequently drunk by children. This was further exacerbated by a general iodine deficiency in the local diet, causing more of the radioactive iodine to be accumulated in the thyroid. Since radioactive iodine is short-lived, if people had stopped giving locally supplied contaminated milk to children for a few months following the accident, it is likely that most of the increase in radiation-induced thyroid cancer would not have resulted. 5 years later, after doing everything it could to cover up the disaster, legal help was finally provided for the affected citizens. 1. The law of the Belarusian SSR on the social security of citizens affected by the catastrophe at the Chernobyl NPP, the 12th of February 1991. 2. The law of the Ukrainian SSR on the status and social security of citizens affected by the accident at the Chernobyl NPP. 3. The laws of the Russian Federation on the social security of citizens affected by radiation in consequence of the accident at the Chernobyl NPP and on the social security of citizens who suffered in consequence of the Chernobyl catastrophe, the 12th of May 1991. Please see link 1A below, after listening to this broadcast. For comparison, the high radiation dose a patient typically receives from one whole-body computed tomography, CT, scan is approximately equivalent to the total dose accumulated in 20 years by the residents of the low-contaminated areas following the Chernobyl accident. Just as the fake news media uses photoshopped pictures to drive fear about mutated animals and children. The sad reality is most people actually believe these things can happen in reality. Hilarious. Media lies. Nothing they tell you is true. It is far too easy to create anything on video, audio, picture. Stop believing what you are told. The International Commission on Radiological Protection and other organizations have never been able to find or register any genetic mutations connected with radiation. Just like the Zika creates a deformed baby is a total lie, so is the radiation scare. The governments have used nuclear disasters to depopulate, to take land by forcing people to relocate, more control, etc. as we have stated before. Chernobyl, 29th of April, 1986 was one nuclear mishap in a long line of decades of nuclear disasters in that same area under the Soviet Union. One oddly similar happened on the 29th of September 1957. There was also an explosion at Mayak nuclear plant. Similarly, evacuation of 22 villages took place, just as with Chernobyl, putting more restricted zones in place and leveling more towns. The USSR did not have much in the way of nuclear safety in place, and much was kept hidden and still is today from that time. Perhaps Chernobyl was just an epicoepsy by a workforce of mentally deficient scientists, or maybe there is more here. Like everything else. We know how the elite love to study how the A-bomb terrorfest went, as well as the effects of the poisons they put into the air. However, they were only able to study short-term high-dose effects of those toxins. Perhaps they wanted a low and slow study for their Nazi human experiments. Just keep in mind, nothing is ever what it seems. Sadly, it is difficult to get Soviet documents, so we will continue our research into this and post more in the future. But if we look on, take a step back. The secret military base Duga 3 was located next to the Chernobyl plant, and it is said the disaster may have been set up to cover up a military leader's continued failure. This base is home to a gigantic radar detection system and weather modification station, like HOP. It is because the leader could not get this working properly that it is suggested he created the disaster at Chernobyl to keep himself from coming under fire. Where does the truth lie? We must dig deeper still. Side note and quote. The Chernobyl power plant was blown up by a foreign agent. Department of Nuclear Energy. Science Academy with its research and design institutes were not ready for such an unexpected disaster. Chernobyl nuclear holocaust was not an accident. Nuclear reactors have high level of reliability proved by a number of tests. Water pumps of primary and backup cooling systems could not have been simultaneously disabled. The picture of blown-up reactor was taken too opportunely by the US satellite that was accidentally on the proper orbit above the fourth block at that very time. Logically analyzed facts and developments of Cold War in 50th showed Chernobyl catastrophe was not an accident.
This is George News.
That was a full-scale sabotage of the century, which
and this is John F. Kennedy Jr.
of the USSR economic basis and Soviet socialist system in general. The adversaries of the USSR made an effective use of the negligence and incompetence of the government headed by Gorbachev, along with the lack of sufficient control of restricted areas. End quote. Vibranov, former Chief of Staff Deputy for Special Zone
Remember that
Forces
love
in Chernobyl
is the
nuclear
only
power
way
plant
forward.
area, retired colonel. Immediately after the accident,
George News.
thousands of machines and equipment were brought in from all parts of Soviet Union to clean the reactor.